Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Diverse and Stars podcast. All my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click that subscribe button, everybody. This is a fantastic episode because boarding the mothership is Rodney Barnes. He's the writer of Killadelphia and the executive producer and writer of Winning Time on HBO Max. Now he's the writer of Nita Hawes' Nightmare blog from Image Comic Books. Come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Barnes. Thank you so much for coming to the First and Stars podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's totally my pleasure. You're a phenomenal writer, and it's an honor to speak with you, sir.
Thank you very much.
So I always start off with a question of inspiration. So what inspired your love of comics, and who were your earliest influences?
Wow. I found out about comics when I was like 5 or 6 years old at the public library. And I love the art. I love the movement. I sort of, even as a kid, understood the nature of graphic storytelling that way in a different way. I wasn't so much a Cat in the Hat or Dr. Seuss kid. I was more of a superhero kid. And I think my early influences, Neil Adams, Mike Grell, like all of the big names from that time sort of grabbed my imagination and just wouldn't let it go. Because Neil Adams did a lot of covers back then. So the Batmans and the Green Lanterns, and then when he went over to Marvel, it was like perfect for me. It appealed to all of my sensibilities.
So when you thought about getting into writing, was it always the goal to write for comic books, or were you particularly novels, screenplays? I know you also do Winning Time on HBO. So what was your initial goal when you thought about I want to be a writer?
The idea of just being a writer in general appealed to me at first. And then I sort of was at a crossroads in life-wise when I realized I would never be good enough as an athlete to get paid for it. Thankfully so, because I suck. And I said, okay, I think TV and film was an idea, but it was always an idea. I wasn't one of those guys that was so self-assured and just confident that this whole thing was going to work out. So I started professionally writing around 2000, 2001, and really haven't let up from there. But screenwriting was first, television primarily, and then I did a lot of movie rewrites. And then comic books came when I did the show Runaways for Marvel, and I made it apparent to Marvel Publishing that if they ever had a spot for me to do a comic book, I'd love to take a shot at writing a comic book. And the rest is kind of history.
Well, you're the writer and co-creator of a phenomenal series called Killadelphia. And Killadelphia, not too long ago, had a spin-off series called Nita Hall's Nightmare Blog, which is also absolutely phenomenal. I love that book. Was it always your intention to spin off a book from Killadelphia?
I knew I wanted a Killadelphia verse, or as Jason says, a Killaverse. For me, I grew up loving the Universal monsters, Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, and the Hammer films, which did a lot of what the Universal monsters did, just with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. And, I hadn't seen one of those in African-American culture, or with characters of color. And I always said if I got a shot and Killadelphia worked, I had a way of sort of integrating, no pun intended, other characters, other monsters, other creatures, so to speak. So it was always a goal to sort of create a world that housed all of these different entities.
So when you were thinking about doing the spinoff, your first spinoff is, like I said, Nita Hall's. What is it about Nita Hall that you thought to yourself, this character deserves it, this character can carry a book on her own?
I knew that I had an idea for another book I wanted to do. I did not know initially that I wanted to connect it to Killadelphia, but I wanted a female protagonist because I wanted a degree of empathy with the thing that she was doing, not so much just ambition. And not to say the guys can't be empathetic, but I wanted it to be a thing to where she was fighting monsters was a cathartic exercise. It wasn't so much just the thing of fighting monsters like one of my heroes, Kolchak, from Kolchak to Night Stalker, is way before your time. So I always knew that she would be a woman. I always knew that she would be a professor of parapsychology. Um, I always knew it would be set in Baltimore. Some of the particulars as to what the storyline would be came along later. I didn't want it to feel like Killadelphia at all, but and feel like Killadelphia at the same time. I wanted it to be a layered story, but more narrative driven and not so much character driven.
Mm,
Um, and I just felt like with each one of the books, because I have two other books that are on Substack that may be coming to Image as well. 20 Degrees Past Rigor, that's a zombie book, and Johnny Gatlin, that is I use hell as the West, the Wild West, and he's a gunslinger.
very
And
cool.
they're set in the Killadelphia world as well. And I wanted each one to feel different, even though they're connected, because I always dug writers that could, like Stephen King would have The Dark Tower, which is radically different from The Shining, which is radically different from The Outsider or Fairy Tale or whatever book, Billy Summers or whoever. It's
Mm.
always all of his books, or many of his books have a different feel. And so I was sort of raised on the school of Stephen King and Richard Matheson and a few other writers. And I always wanted to just show some versatility in regards to my writing and not necessarily be one dimensional.
So the interesting thing about Killadelphia and Nita Hall is that the stakes are extremely high on both books. Basically, you have very in real way end of the world level stakes. So how do you equate both books to keep them on equal level of stakes, so one book doesn't feel more important or valuable to the world than the other?
Well, they're connected. Um, the stories are connected. You have a couple of characters like Anansi, who flows back between Killadelphia and with Nita Hawes, and he's a god. So if either character is talking to a god, the Killadelphia people or whatever, you already realize that there are major implications as far as how the world's going to be affected. Um, I think I wanted the Nita Hawes antagonist to be more personal because her book is much more personal. So Howling Henry and Jackie the Ripper, they both have more of a up close in your face sort of presence. Whereas in Killadelphia, you have, presidents and demons and, major historical dynamics that come into play to give it a larger sense of scope. And you have a lot more characters in Killadelphia than you do in Nita Hawes. I mean, at one point, I had one story where I said like 7 vampires, 4 werewolves, a witch, and it's like there's so many characters in that book that sometimes it can become claustrophobic. But much bigger expanse in Killadelphia, much more intimate in Nita Hawes.
And I will say, Nita Hall is such a gorgeous looking book. The art is tremendous. It has a very also, at least in my opinion, a kind of a cinematic noir feel to it. Does that come from your screenwriting film background, or is that just naturally how you write?
I think, credit to the artist, Sisman Krudansky. I may be butchering his name. I apologize in advance. And Jason, Shawn Alexander. I mean, they both are like directors. They both do what they do. The way that they tell a story is very visual, and the way that they go about, doing what they do. So I credit anything that's visual to them. I hope that I'm an inspiration in some little way, but it's all anything that's beautiful about the way the book looks is them.
So, as you said, the book takes place in Baltimore, Maryland, which is obviously different than Killadelphia.
And Patrick Reynolds, who did book number 1 as well.
Like I said,
and B, who did book 2 and 3. So
like I said, they're all tremendous. Like, so the book is stunning to look at, and like I said, and what I did like I said, Baltimore, Maryland is where this Nita Hall takes place. Obviously, different than Killadelphia. How did you make Baltimore its own character? Because it does feel when you read the comic book that you're and I was born in Baltimore, so I'm familiar with it. So when you write, you can kind of like feel Baltimore. So when you're writing it, how did you make it feel like a living, breathing entity?
Well, I'm from Annapolis, so there's that. And I did go to 1 year of college in high school in Baltimore, Northwestern High School. Um, so I know a little bit about the area. And I felt like Killadelphia is set in Philadelphia. So I wanted it to feel like Philadelphia. Um, the settings of these places are characters as well. Like in the zombie book, it's set in Flint, Michigan. So I wanted it to feel like Flint as well. So with each area, the geography of America has a tendency to yield a very specific idea to the people who live in it, culturally. So I wanted the monsters or the horror to sort of reflect that. And, so that was sort of the goal. With Baltimore, like I said, I'm an Annapolitan, at heart. So spent a lot of time in Baltimore, know the area, worked at the Inner Harbor for a little while. And so all of those places, been to Edgar Allan Poe's place and this place. And when I was a Boy Scout, we used to hike all around. So all of those places influenced me along the way. And if I can just put a little garnish in there every once in a while of Baltimore, you feel like you're there.
So basically, it sounds like you're basically making the city or the threat to that city a metaphor for kind of maybe how people see it. Like Flint is a very damaged city from everything else. Baltimore, once again, known recently for its area of violence. How are you matching? Are you kind of creating the threat to match like the metaphor for it?
I mean, I think again, it's how I try to use. It's how the people see themselves, and I think that enters whether you're dealing with a protagonist or an antagonist. How people deal with each other sort of plays a role in all of that. So, I think for Baltimore is kind of a folksy town. It has a very personal. It's funny because if you're talking to people from Baltimore, you can hear a little Baltimore. I've been gone for 25 years, and if you listen long enough, you'll hear some of that area in there. It's how people say things, it's how people do things, it's how people points of view. All of that I think is integrated into how the story itself manifests. With book one, volume one, with Howling Henry, I try to use a lot of landmarks from Baltimore and Annapolis that play into how a story like that would be told. That same story, if you placed it in LA, wouldn't be the same. It would have a different look. It would be, the expanse would be bigger. The way people reacted would be bigger. The threat itself would warrant a bigger response. If it was in New York, same thing. But it's still a city. Like Baltimore's still a city, but it's not New York. It's not LA. It's really just geography.
I really like how you did include Edgar Allan Poe's home in Nita Hall. That was a really great touch to put in there.
Thank you. One of the things sometimes when I think you're dealing with specificity in stories is you can lose the fact that you're dealing with genre. And Edgar Allan Poe is a big part of, genre. So if I can add in that Edgar Allan Poe is from here and this is this place and all of those things, and maybe you'll see other things as time goes on. I just think it makes it more fun.
You're gonna throw in Kingdom by any chance? Kingdom Yards?
Possibly. Cool. You never know. I won't give anything away.
I'm a hardcore Baltimore Orioles fan, so I just had to ask.
When I worked on the movie Major League, I was there for 6 months every single day.
Oh, so very cool.
Yeah, we shot it there. Yeah.
It may be the most beautiful park I think ever constructed, in my personal opinion.
I would argue Yankee Stadium is pretty impressive, but okay for today.
You got the warehouse. I gotta go with the warehouse.
Yes, you're Mike today, so you'll win.
So in the story, the character of Nita lost her brother Jason to gun violence. How has that tragedy forged her into the person she is now?
I think anytime you're dealing with tragedy like that, not just the death of a sibling, but a violent death, it's traumatic regardless, but I think even more so, when you live in a state of affairs to where it's possible, but it's almost like you hope it doesn't happen to you or someone that you love. I think it makes it a lot more personal, and it makes it harder to shake. if you're, again, loss is loss, but if you're dealing with someone who's had the opportunity to live a full life, then maybe there can be more of a sense of understanding because the person had that opportunity to live 80, 90 years. But for someone who was just starting life, who you were connected to and personally felt responsible for, and that person was cut down before their time, I think there's a sense of guilt. There's a sense of the trauma that's there, that guilt and shame that kind of walk together. And just a bunch of stuff that falls under that umbrella that I think makes it hard to shake. And so when he comes back to her, I wanted the audience to wonder whether is this real or is this her imagination run amok.
So taking the idea that Jason may be a real ghost who's assisting Nita throughout the story, and you're dealing the story with gods and devils, is there the idea potentially that the death wasn't an accident? Is this fate on some level? Is this was like destined, or is it just bad luck?
Now see, you're getting into storylines now. I can't give that one away,
No
but
worries.
yeah, I mean, there's some of that. There's some that's possible.
And in the first issue, you had this character. I might say Taekwon. Am I saying it correctly?
Which one?
Tequan.
Taquan, yeah.
Taquan. And I believe it's the first issue where he's questioning God creating what he calls hater angel, which I thought was a wonderful line of dialogue. I thought that was perfect. So, and I think that begs a big theological question about what does it say about God if there are demons and a Lucifer that would have to have come from his creation. So the character Taekwon questions, what does it say about the nature of God if there are these hater angels? So how does their existence explain or kind of define your view of a God in this story, and also a character like Corson who comes down that same line of having been created on some level by this God?
Well, I try really hard not to take a position, one side or the other. The characters who see the world the way that they see them that way, and vice versa. I always say whenever I'm at a con and someone asks me that question, I hope you never see me or hear me in either of these stories or anything that I write. I try to be objective in a sense that I don't judge any characters or say they're right or wrong. They just see the world from different points of view. I think, as far as my personal beliefs are concerned, I haven't really landed it. They evolve over time. You asked me the same thing that I believed maybe 5 years ago. In time, I may have evolved to something that's a little bit more elevated. Hopefully. But yeah, I don't put any of me into it.
So within context of the story, as you mentioned, the character of Anansi, who is an African, a god of African mythology, the fact that in this world of demons and gods, so things, Judeo-Christian views of those, how do these other mythological gods factor into that overall concept of the world you're creating?
It's sort of like a lot of these gods are gods. Many people haven't been popularly thrown out to the world as part of a comic book universe, so to speak. Some have, some haven't. And, I always said, if I could tell the story of these gods in the same way that you would in Thor, where you would have Odin and you would have, Midgard and Asgard and all these other places, what if you created a universe where other gods that weren't utilized in the same way or to the same degree had that same kind of shine placed on them? And that's all I'm really doing. Nothing against. I'm sort of dealing with the Yoruban gods and African gods the same way the Norse gods would be dealt with, or Greek, or any of the other gods, and who may also factor in as well. It's just a thing of saying some underutilized characters in history or mythology get some love too.
These gods who are also like a Nazi, who are fighting themselves in the middle of this big squabble between heaven and hell, are they to the same goals of the humans do, of like helping us?
No. It's relative. I think the gods of Killadelphia and Nita are trying to stave off the War of Armageddon, which is the ultimate war, which could possibly restructure the idea of mankind. So they're trying to keep that at bay. What happens, what we want as people is sort of relative to what we want is personal. Ours is more narcissistic. Ours is more, we want what we want. We want to stay alive. We want to be safe. We want to make it through. Their idea is that mankind gets to make it through, and that they still are able to have worshipers who they've protected in a larger sense. So I don't think it's as personal in a way that we would typically define a relationship between a worshiper and a god.
So when you look at some of the antagonists like Corson, hopefully I'm pronouncing that one correctly, or Corson.
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 I say it could be Corson. I say Corson.
I'll go Corson. Once again, he's one of the primary antagonists of the story. And in issue, I believe 10, you introduced you got Lucifer in the storyline. Does he view Corson as a threat or an impediment?
Always a threat. There are 4 master demons of hell. At least in there's a bunch of different mythologies when it comes to hell, but I use 4, and Corson is one of the 4, and that goes into the Johnny Gatlin storyline of where they're all jockeying for the power of who's in control of hell. And everybody's trying to take down Lucifer. Lucifer is always the guy that's in charge, but the other ones want to do away with Lucifer so that they have ultimate domain. So there's no trust amongst any of them.
So just to go idea of the mythology that we're working within, Lucifer, as the mythology goes, is the fallen angel. The others, like Belial, that is this in the story, Corson. I don't know. I can't remember who the 4th.
I'll introduce that one. I forgot his name.
Are the other 3 in within the mythology you're creating also angels or fallen angels, or are they something different?
They're fallen angels as well. Yeah.
So there's a great line that Lucifer says, and if you don't mind, I'm going to quote the line.
Yeah, go for it.
Lucifer states, "Time and persistence rest with the immortal." So is immortality the true advantage of these demons, and how does their immortality affect their perspective?
When you have all the time in the world, it's kind of like it's the same thing for vampires as well. Whereas there's an urgency to being human because you only have 70, 80 years. With the immortals, they don't have that perspective because they're immortals and they're much more difficult to kill and do away with. So, yeah, it always is on the side of the immortals.
So when Lucifer and Corson are planning, is this a truly long-term plan, or is there immediacy to what the happening and this is imminent?
Both. I think in the Killadelphia sense, there's a war going on in the streets of Philadelphia. The war, in fact, for arc number, I guess this is 5, arc 5 we're in right now. Every issue of the 6 issues, really, it all takes place over one night. It's the first night of the war. And so there is an immediacy to that when it comes to our characters. The larger idea of the ultimate war is something that is close, but not as close as the thing that's happening right in front of us.
So this other, I'm not sure this is a spoiler. So if it is, well, tell me to cut it, I'll cut it. But it's a question I was curious about. So we're talking about issue 10, okay? So Nita is hesitant to return to Earth due to the situation. Her brother Jason kind of forces the issue. What is that? Is Jason right to force an issue like that? Is that something that she should have been able to make the decision on? What does that say about her?
Right is relative, but I also think that in the same sense as the question you asked me a little earlier about Jason being cut down so young, Nita's got a lot of life left. And she's a bright light in a world that needs more bright lights. So from a sense of obligation, it would be a travesty if she were to be cut down before she was able to self-actualize. And the moment that she's in right now is more of an emotional one of being overwhelmed, that perhaps she could make a more clear-minded decision once that time has passed. Like right now, she's in a place of loss. So I don't know if the best decisions are made when we're at our most stressed.
How changed is she from the experience that she went through in issue 10?
I think all of it is incrementally getting her to a place where she sees she's special. And I think it's like with any of us in life who do anything of note. And when I say of note, I mean anything. It could be, any walk of life, being a parent, being anything. That until sometimes we don't accept our gifts, like we sort of, because they come so natural, it's easy to ignore or avoid them. And I think for Nita, the more she sees how important she is to the overall idea of the universe, the more she feels obliged to become a part of the war.
So you have these four books that exist in this universe. Are we expecting an incoming crossover across these books soon, or
maybe?
So,
I don't want to give it away, man. I can't give it away. Come on.
I have to ask.
What the spoiler? I can't tell you at the end whether Luke blows up the Death Star. Spoiler alert, he does. But yeah,
I have to ask this. So, can you give us some hints of what's in the future for Nita Hawe?
More of her getting closer to self-actualizing who she ultimately is. But a bumpy ride in getting there. I don't think life is a straight line for us as people. We all go through some stuff, and I think it's the same thing for her as well, that she's going through some stuff and she's going to keep going through some stuff, but ultimately she's going to move in a direction that our story needs her to.
Now, is the story going to be definitely ongoing, or is there a set amount of issues you're thinking, without giving away the number, that it goes this long and it stops?
I have an idea in my head of how long I want all of this to go.
Okay, good answer.
I can't give you
no.
the number. That would give it away. It would be like, but there is a number.
I definitely wouldn't want you to give it away, but like I said, I was curious on the idea of it. Another question is a bit of a segue, but I'm a big fan. You're the executive producer and writer on Winning Time, The Rise of the Lakers Dynasty. Can you say anything about the progress of season 2?
We're almost done season 2. I think we wrap at the end of January. I think we've done some really good work. Look forward to folks seeing what we do and hopefully digging it.
The first season I really thought was tremendous. And the funny thing is, I'm not even a basketball fan, and I really did love the hell out of that series. Just without bothering too much about the show, how hard is it to write seasons of real life? You know what I'm saying? Because it's obviously based on the things that happened. You're kind of constrained by reality on some level. How difficult is that?
I mean, I think it's all tough. I mean, I did it with the Wu-Tang series. I've had Fantasy with American Gods, and then grounded with Wu-Tang and Winning Time. I think it's difficult, but fortunately, there's enough stuff that happened in real life to sort of validate and create bridges to drama. So, there's a Shakespearean aspect to the coaching carousel. There is, anytime you have a team of strangers coming together for a collective goal, you always have drama within that idea, certainly with something as competitive as pro basketball. And we've got this massive cast to sort of inspire along the way to do their best work. So, yeah, it's a challenge, but it's a good one. It's a healthy one.
Well, and I definitely will say the actors you guys chose for all the roles feel like they're dead on. I mean, if you don't know you're watching fiction for a little while, you're watching and you think they're real people for a little while.
Yeah, thank you. They're all great. They're all incredibly great, as well as our costume designers and set dressers and all of that. We got the best of the best.
Well, like I said, I think it's a tremendous show, and I've really enjoyed reading your comics as well. So, Mr. Barnes, thank you so much for talking with me. You're fantastic, and thank you so much.
Appreciate you, Jeff. All right, man. You too.